Nothing like having to adjust your front wheel after a good sprint. Hello and welcome. For those new to my channel, welcome. For those returning, welcome back. This is Zwift Racing League Stage 2. We are in France for Douce France, if that is how you pronounce it correctly. Not sure. Let me know. So this is a sprinter stage. We have 4 sprints. Not only are they first across the line, but they're also fastest through the segments. Now, the way the points work are for first across the line, top 20 get points. For fastest through segment, top 5 get points. And this was a tough stage, super fast. So I decided to go with the NV78 wheels primarily because I needed to stay with the group through the hills. Now, this stage has a lot of rolling hills up front. Typical Zwift start, starting off real hard in the 400s and powering through to keep with that front group, because if you don't power through the start, you get left behind and you might not ever see the front group again. You see a couple guys there kind of leading it off. Thankfully, as we start to approach this bridge, the tempo starts to slow down a bit and the pace starts to get reasonable, which is why I got excited, because I knew that that meant people were focused on the actual sprinting itself. They weren't really looking to fight through these hills, through the rollers. As I take a quick swig there of my energy drink, because I know that even though we don't have a sprint coming up early on, these hills are gonna put me to task. Because even though there's not a lot of elevation gain, these constant rollers, kind of like going through Titan's Grove, if you're not keeping up with the group going over top of the hill, then ultimately you end up falling behind and it becomes infinitely harder to catch up. And that is the reason why I chose the NV78s, to have that extra help going up over these hills, which is why I'm fast forwarding through all this, because the reality is that part of the stage was super boring. So as we approach the first sprint, you see that we're holding a mild pace in the mid 200s, 45 kilometers an hour, going slightly uphill, which tells you how fast this group is actually going. You see a couple people off the front there, some fire socks off the front, because as we start approaching these sprints, the true real sprinters are getting out and getting out in front of the group with almost a kilometer to go sometimes. Like, they were really heading out far. And so as I approach this bridge, get up on the front wheels, get up into the 900s. My focus was to try and stay pretty reasonable. I wanted to stay within the 8-900s for all these sprints, because I knew having the 4 sprints back to back meant that I would end up having to conserve my power a bit. But through these rollers, that really hurt me on being able to maximize my sprinting. So you see this group is really spread apart, and that kind of, happens through these sprints. And so if I'm not careful, then I'm gonna, I could end up falling off the back, and again, this group would get away. So I, dig a little bit deep to catch on. Thankfully, I don't have to work that hard, because this group is so long that as long as you're putting a little extra effort to push through, you'll, come together as this group starts to then, come together finally. And as you see my watts drop into the hundreds, I slow down a bit and stop pedaling for a second or two, because as I start to catch up to this group, I end up coasting to the front. So again, fast forwarding to the next sprint, because there's really nothing going on here. We just kind of stay together. Ultimately, everybody's looking at what's going to happen on this aqueduct sprint. It is really, the aqueduct is probably the hardest feature in this stage, not just because it is a, short, steep climb. But because of this right here, as the HUD pops up, you can see that the aqueduct is not just a, quick 1 point whatever kilometer, sprint. As you see, the KOM comes up as 0.42 kilometers. So it's not just a, 420-meter sprint. It's this whole section that's a little over a kilometer of elevation and then plateau, elevation and then plateau. And so you see, pushing into the 300s. I got into the 400s there for a second. You see the small group going off the front, about 3, 4 guys off the front. I'm having to jump into the 4, 500s again because I'm in the middle where this is starting to split up, and I'm worried that I'm going to drop back into that split. And I don't want to, I don't want to get lost in that section. So I push up a little bit more and doing my best to hold that. I know that if I'm going to contend with these sprints, I have to stay with these front group guys. I have to be able to keep up with them. At this point, I'm thinking if I could, if I could hold a strong sprint for the FTS, then I can at least, do well there. But if I don't watch it, I will end up falling off the back and that front group will get away, which is sort of what happens here. I thought I could, push a little bit hard going up this climb. I'm in the 600s right now, 700s. I knew I could hold that, at least up towards the flat part of this climb. I ease off a little bit to get some rest and then throw a second kick in there into the 700s so that way I can push myself up, hopefully to get into the, FTS points. But as you can see, I just gassed out halfway through that plateau. My quads were on fire. Something about my position today, don't know what it was, but something about my position today, my quads were overworked and I just was not able to, really push through the end of that. As you saw, I had to adjust my front wheel again because as I sprint, I tend to sprint like Caleb Ewan, where I push my body forward off the front and kick back in order to produce a little bit more power, engage my quads and my hamstrings a little, or sorry, my glutes and my hamstrings a little bit more rather than, just driving through my quads. And so as I'm in this little group, I'm worried that that front group is going to get away. You see, they got a good distance on us right now. They're at least, so the group between me and the front group is a few seconds off from us. You see, we're starting to pull them back just a little bit, but that front group is, 4 or 5 seconds off of the front of us. And so I know that if they get away, they're gone. There's nothing I'm going to be able to do to catch up. So this little group pushes hard. You see me go into the 400s for a second there through that little, little bit of a hill. But ultimately, this group is pushing hard. We've got a couple ATP guys that are, looks like one of the guys in particular that's up front there is the one that's kind of driving that pace. So I just looked at it as an opportunity to let them drive. If ATP is going to the, push the chase, then let them push it. I just, did my best to stay behind them. And as you see, more and more people start piling up in this group, letting me kind of fade to the back. And here we go on the second sprint, going through the pave and just pushing as hard as I can. But as you can see, the best I have at this point is the upper 500s, mid 500s, and just doing my best to hold it. I'm still pushing through the group pretty well, but ultimately I just got nothing left to be able to compete in the FTS or FAL points. And so I just did my best to keep going. I got 19th across the line for the FTS, which I felt was a good place for me, but I knew that I wasn't going to compete with the FTS. And obviously I wasn't able to compete with the FAL. So at this point, I'm looking at, can we catch up to this front group? We got a little, pod growing that, again, that front group is got a few seconds on us. And while we were on Discord, we were talking about it. As I jumped to the last kilometer here, last kilometer and a half, you see that obviously we all came back together. This group is about 41 people strong. There's one person off the front that's 7 seconds off the front. We don't know what they were doing. because that person left literally at the 4 kilometer mark and just pushed it, stayed completely off the front. You see in the little grafter, they're holding somewhere in between 250 to 300 watts, which is pretty decent considering, they're by themselves and a few seconds ahead of this group. We're kind of cruising at 40, 43, 44 kilometers an hour, pushing into 45 now. Because as we start to approach this last kilometer, the pace is really starting to kick up. You see, I'm in the mid 300s, pushed into the low 400s there for a second. I'm trying to modulate my tempo so that way I can shift my gears up, but also not overwork myself while I'm on, while this chase is literally starting to speed up. We're hitting 48 kilometers an hour as we approach the final 600 meters of this, and the lead out train is moving, absolutely moving. And so I start to fall off the back there for a second because I tried to ease off the power just so that way I can position myself a little bit better to kind of push through the group, but I let myself go a little bit too far back. You see JD there coming up on my left, and he and I just kind of match tempo to tempo and just push hard. And as hard as I can get, which was about 500, a little over 500 watts, I give a second surge into the 800 watts, just so that way I can kind of keep up with this front and hopefully push through. But ultimately, that was as best as I could do. Crossed the line in 34th place. And as you can see, we completed this route in 35 minutes, which was absolutely flying. I think we averaged over 40 kilometers an hour, which for a bunch of people on bike trainers in their, living rooms, den, garages, wherever they're at, I think we did a fantastic job. We crushed it as not only as a team, but just as a group of independent people across the internet racing. So what are my takeaways? I'd say, given the fact that I went with a wheel set that was a little bit unexpected for most people would have gone with the disc wheels, as you saw, or the Tron bike. Because of the rollers, I decided to go with the NBs, and I feel like it was worth it. I was able to keep up with the front group, even though it felt a little bit harder to stay with the group when I was in it, because there was a couple moments where I would fall off the back and then have to push a little bit to get back on, or to stay on because I would fall to basically the last person in the group. And I knew that if I didn't pick up the pace, I would end up falling off the back, and I'd push myself into the mid 200s, upper 200s just to get back on, and then kind of coast a little bit. So that back and forth, I think, did hurt me a little bit because those surges, as you saw my power graph, those surges ultimately do pull pull the energy out of you. But and then also going in and through those hills, I feel like it did a great job. I feel like it was the right choice to be on those wheels. And considering, I just came off of FRR, which is a pretty hard series, I feel like I improved from that race to this series. So if you're looking to see what the upcoming stages are, be sure to check out Zwifter's channel or JD's channel for the recons, and I will catch you guys on the next race.